Welcome to the Liberty Bell. We are exploring the moral foundations of freedom, and we are seeking what is right with all of our heart, soul, and might. I'm James.
And I'm Josh. And today we want to introduce you to our project and our goals for what this podcast is all about. We want to give you a brief introduction into ourselves, what we believe, and what really drove us to come together and kind of create a project like this. And so we're excited to talk to you about who we are, what we believe, and what we're passionate about in our current landscape in our country.
Yeah, and hopefully in not too boring a fashion.
Hopefully not too boring like what I was just sounding like there. But that's what's exciting about doing something like this is you grow to be more passionate about it, and you become I guess a better speaker in what you do, and so I'm excited about that.
So let me just say for context that today is July 18th, 2020.
June.
All right, let me just say for context, today, listeners, is June 18th, 2020. We currently have Aunt Jemima has been canceled today.
Yes.
This is the big news. Aunt Jemima is canceled.
Goodbye. Aunt Jemima.
This is a time of massive protests, civil unrest in the streets. This is a time of leadership in communities caving to protesters and mob rules. So Josh, what made you want to start this podcast? Because you had the inception of this podcast.
Well, so as I shared with you, as we were talking about just things going on in our country, watching these things happen, I shared with you, of course, got the podcast associated with the church, and that's been an exciting kind of part of my life. Right. And do enjoy that, passionate about it. I want to continue doing what I'm doing there. I believe it's a great ministry through our church. But I really felt like that in our country, specifically with churches and church people, there is kind of a lack of, I guess, boldness to stand as a Christian, but as a patriot as well. We're so quick to wear a cross around our neck and be Christians and tell everybody we're Christians, but unfortunately we've seen a trend in the church where people are getting shamed for believing different, disagreeing with certain things. And that's no different in the political landscape. If you're, I feel, a conservative, if you have those and hold those values, and I believe if you compare the Bible if you use the Bible as your source and as your foundation for how you should politically vote or how you should believe or how you should think, your worldview, I think you'll find more conservative values. And I feel like that there is a large group of people that are missing that kind of connection, that kind of dedication. And so that was a huge drive for me to want to do something like this.
So talk a little bit more about that, because that's something that's interesting to me about the state of the Christian church. Because it's been very like a turnoff to me.
Yeah.
My wife and I spent a lot of time trying to find a church the last few years. And it's just what the Christian world seems to really be going along with the kind of social justice mentality.
Right.
Or my wife always says, there's this thing where you have Jesus as lion and lamb, but for the modern Christian church, Jesus is all lamb.
Right.
So it's all about just kind of like giving in. It's about not standing up. What is it? Say more about that. What's the issue there?
Sure. I truly feel like that the church, a lot of churches have the wrong mindset of what growth looks like. Every church wants to grow. Every church wants to have to build a bigger building and buy more land, and they want their Christian school, and they want the community aspect, and everybody wants that in their heart. But there's some people that are not willing to let that kind of desire corrupt, first of all, Scripture,
right,
and what they preach, what they teach, the way that they carry themselves. And so I believe we see, especially over the past 20 years, maybe 30 years in the church, you see this great turning away from what some people would call the old paths or the old ways, and finding that foundation of, what we believe the Bible says, how we are supposed to live, how we're supposed to carry ourselves. And there's just been this kind of destruction in the church of, trying to tie everything that goes on culturally into the church to make it relevant for, first of all, young people. Because we see the older folks, they grew up in church and they're dedicated to church and they'll go to church till they die. But this younger crowd coming up, even if mom and dad goes to church, they just don't have the same zeal or desire to go to church. And so you find churches willing to sacrifice things biblically, scripturally, to almost pander to that group.
Absolutely. That's such a turnoff to someone like me looking for a church, because it's so transparent.
Sure.
So, I mean, it sounds like what I'm hearing you say is that churches really are concerned more with the physical than the moral or the spiritual.
Sure.
It's more about the numbers, the economics.
Yeah. And there's great churches out there. I mean, there's good churches out there. And they're like what I was trying to allude to is there's some people that are not willing to back down on those things.
Yeah.
And when you see those kind of pastors and you see those kind of church people, it encourages me. I can think of 3 or 4 local pastors that I know, people that I look up to, that I really respect how they carry themselves in their ministry, because even though there's almost this call for churches to become relevant to 2020, they're not willing to sacrifice or back down on what they believe or what they preach to be relevant. I've often said to our congregation at our church, I'd rather have 4 people that are dedicated to the Bible and are prayer warriors than have 400 people that are just there for whatever their personal reasons are to come to church.
Right.
And I think that it'll be hard to see true change in our country until church people start taking church serious.
Yeah. So hopefully we can explore what that really means
in
this podcast.
Yeah. Sorry. I mean, I guess, and to think about that, I guess that probably sounds it's probably a little confusing to some people because...
Well, it's one thing to say it, but it's like, I think a lot of churches say something like that.
Yeah.
But it's kind of vague. It's like, what does that mean? I think there's a need right now to really drill down on these issues.
Sure.
And go deeper.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, if I can tie this in, if I may. So what you're saying about the church, I mean, I kind of see that everywhere, where the focus is on the physical and not on the spiritual.
Right.
And it's true politically too. I mean, the concern of politics is about, the problem is people are poor. The problem is, how do we allocate resources and all this stuff, right? Like, and I haven't seen it like that at all. To me, it's like everything comes down to the character of people.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
People with real moral character, they will generate prosperity for themselves, or stability, at least. And without that moral foundation, people will always dissolve into kind of poverty and chaos.
Yeah.
So trying to fix economic issues it's like a surface concern, and nobody ever drills down any deeper than that. And that's my impetus for getting involved in something like this.
Sure. Well, and the mindset goes, well, people are poor, so let's give them these programs or systems. And I don't disagree with trying to help people or offer things. I mean, you see that a lot inner city. We don't live in that kind of atmosphere.
Yeah.
So or at least I've never been around that. Your life experience at some point in time may have been a little different, but you see that, all right, the way we're going to fix problems, we're just going to hand out, and it creates these people who are dependent on a system that is not designed to provide that.
Right.
And I believe that's why we see the worldview, as I like to say, the worldview shift from what our American mindsets are to socialism, communism, etc. These people that are trying to take over, they know they must change the way the system's structured and the way that people look at the system in order to successfully change things. Because if you look at things from a true American standpoint, just an American standpoint, I mean, you throw in Christian standpoint, definitely. You work for what you get, and you pray that God provides, and
Right.
you have faith, and you go to church and you tithe and you pray and you study your Bible and
Right.
you're honest with people, and then you succeed. God doesn't just give you everything. I mean, you don't just wake up and he just, oh, well, here's a brand new mansion.
And that value system has been erased in the culture.
Oh, sure.
It's funny, even you watch like Andy Griffith. And I watch the Andy Griffith show all the time
Yes,
with my
it's
kid.
the best.
But even on Andy Griffith, you see this kind of value system of like men who work hard, who don't want charity. You know, it's like
right.
people have a pride, and there's like episodes
yes.
devoted to people like
Sure.
you know, like they have pride to not want charity or something free. They want all their dealings to be honest and fair and based on hard work. And honesty is like a major theme in those shows from that time. So even that was, 50 years ago, but those values are, absolutely thick in that show.
Right.
Now, it's nowhere. There's not even a shred of it.
Oh, no.
All those kind of values are only the object of jokes
TV,
and ridicule.
yeah, exactly. TV is so polluted and corrupted, and that's what we're pouring into people's heads.
Yeah.
And I mean, so what we're talking about, what we're thinking about, and this is kind of even going off of what we were intending on talking about, but it's great. It's a great conversation to think about how, if you look at the issue that we find, the issue starts at home, I believe.
Absolutely.
And
100%.
fathers missing from homes, and you've got fathers missing from homes. You've got you have fathers in homes, but they're drug addicts,
Right.
and mothers are drug addict, whatever. They don't have examples at home.
Yeah.
And then in turn, a lot of the kids I knew growing up that maybe didn't have a good family life, they had a grandparent or they had somebody down the road that took them to church and tried to, through those channels, show them, there's a different way. And you don't see that a lot anymore.
No.
And if you do, it's very limited. A lot of people I know that will take grandkids to church and things, or friends or family, people down the street. Yeah. It's just gotten harder to do that. And so when you have the issue at home, everything starts at home. And then you go and look at things on the social scale. When there's no order at home, there's no direction at home, how can you expect anybody to be moral people?
Right.
And so they don't have a home life. They're not Christians. They don't have a spiritual belief system that guides them in a moral way. People, they don't believe, they're scared to death if you talk about the Holy Spirit and believe that that's a guiding force in life. So that's, I think, where the root of the issue is.
Yeah.
One of our goals on this podcast is to talk about masculinity and what it means to be a man and be a leader. Yeah. And you don't have to be, when I think about, people want to make you think, when you think of a man, you got to be this, you take the Bible, for instance, when people talk about great men, they talk about Samson, how great a, you think of him being a big muscular man. And,
right.
But when you find true godliness and true manliness, he was at his lowest point in his life when he succeeded the most for the Lord. And it's when he said, God, you've given me all this strength, but I'm going to relinquish it back to you and let you use me. And the mindset of what a man is, that's part of what this issue, or a huge part of what this issue is. Men don't know how to be men.
Right.
They don't know how to be honorable. They do things to only benefit themselves. They get married to people, not realizing that marriage is it's this daily relationship where you give your all to another person.
Right.
They have children. They won't dedicate anything to the children because they're still focused on themselves. Yeah. And we wonder why people are out shooting each other in the street. We wonder why they're burning buildings down. We wonder why this stuff's happening. It starts in the home. Yeah,
100%. My whole motivation for doing this podcast is it's so important to talk about all the political stuff that's going on. We live in such a hyper political landscape right now. But to me, all the conversations around politics all has to be boiled down to this root issue of manhood in the home. Because I believe that when men are strong, the family will be strong.
Right.
The home will be strong. When the home is strong, the community will be strong. When the community is strong, the state will be strong. The country will be strong. It starts there with men learning how to be men. And there are no, I mean, my whole generation, we all grew up with a lack of example in that,
Right.
specifically from the culture, because all male characters that we grew up with are either super competent, awesome, skilled guys who are incapable of having any kind of relationship, right? Or, they're really solid stand-up guys, but they're totally weak and have no authority, So the integration of those two things is sorely lacking in the world.
Yeah.
And we got to have that to get men on the right path.
And that's what's concerning is that you take in the United States and you think about how we've received entertainment. I mean, I guess I think the secular movements, the college movements that started late 50s, early 60s, most of the 60s, broke down at least a half of our young generation. You've got a half of the people at home, especially mid to late 60s. You got half of these people at home at college, and we've talked about this, and they're being spoon-fed whatever these professors believe about politics, about war, about people fighting in a war. And you see the mindsets we see now are very similar to what you see in that era.
Oh, yeah.
All right, and I don't wasn't in the military. I have a lot of family military. My grandfather served in Vietnam. But you take that era, so I don't speak from true experience, but I do speak from what I can see by studying the landscape of that era. And you see during that time, that Vietnam era, you see people at home being spoon-fed how bad our soldiers are. And they come home and they're disrespected, they're treated bad, they have things thrown at them, they're spit on, they riot. I mean, the students were rioting, they were tearing the nation to pieces. And we're seeing the same thing today of these people are being spoon-fed through media, and it's been coming through media, TV, movies, and it's been coming for years.
Oh, yeah.
And so the mindset, this mob has the same mindset as that 60s mob. That, all right, I'm not going to stand for a nation like this. My own people, I'm going to throw stuff at them. I'm going to spit on them. 90% of those boys over there didn't make that choice to go. Most of them were trapped. I say 90%. I don't know the true number, but it's the same mindset of, okay, I don't like this system.
Yeah.
But I don't know what the world truly looks like. If I'm sitting at home and my professor's telling me everything and I'm believing everything, I don't know what's going on across the country. I don't know what's going on the other side of the world.
Right.
And in that day, the secular movement in the colleges, the movement of those professors and the teachers and the whole just kind of you do your own thing kind of movement, it's the same thing we're seeing today. And it creates chaos.
We're paying the price now.
Oh, yeah.
For the 60s.
I agree.
I mean, it's been coming for 50 years. But that's when we threw away the Andy Griffith values.
Well, exactly. And so you throw those values away, and you take the 70s, and you start seeing this more edgy, very subtle. A lot of, most of the time, I used to think I always thought everything you watched from the 70s, you could watch. There wasn't anything. But when I was a kid, I just thought, man, all this stuff when my dad was a kid was just fine. There wasn't anything bad in it. But I realized my dad was having to filter what we were being handed to watch or listen to or whatever it may have been. And so you see in the 70s, you see this movement of movie making and kind of expression of art or whatever. And you see in the 80s, you see certain secular movements that create, especially the kind of rambunctious rebellion mindset in the 80s. You go into the 90s, and that's where the rap culture begins to come in. The gang culture really comes in. And you've got hood rats that are father figures for kids because they don't have anything, and they feel approved by that kind of figure. Yeah. And so you come into the era we're in today, and look, I mean, it's been on its way this whole time. And I believe that it's throwing the values aside and just casting them away, and look where we're at now.
Right. And to me, the big picture of the values thrown aside is throwing out masculine values.
Sure.
So in the 60s, the whole thing was to get rid of, honor, respect, all that was sacrificed in the name of personal indulgence,
right,
exploration.
Yeah. It sounds dirty, doesn't it?
Just
it sounds awful. It just doesn't, doesn't sound good.
Just that's when, it became totally acceptable for men to become like skeezy, basically.
Sure.
You know, like, and once culture adopted that premise in the 60s, everything that has come since has been some kind of extension of that. Yeah. And so, of course, you've seen men become weak, men become incapable of keeping their families together,
sure,
skyrocketing divorce rates, men not being able to be good fathers, and from there, it's just you're basically in the downward spiral.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, they've taken away heroes as heroes should be.
Right.
The biblical characters, I believe, should be first off, Jesus is the greatest example of someone we should live like and be like. That's probably another fueling thought about this podcast is that he didn't care to offend people. And he spoke with great authority when he told the truth. And I don't speak with the authority he does because I'm not perfect, but I'm one of his children.
And that's an aspiration.
And I want to be more like him.
Yeah,
I'll never achieve that, but I want to be more like him. That's being a Christian. That's what it's about.
Right.
But they've taken away heroes. And yes, I think Bible heroes are great people to look to. But I think we live in when you're coming up as a kid, you have certain people that you look to that are heroes in your life. And for me, those were, of course, my dad was one of my heroes, but my grandfathers, both of them were men that I looked up to, and I just wanted to be like them because they just, it seemed like they had it all together. I didn't realize that they were 65, 70 years old, and they've lived long enough to see what the world's like and become who they are because of what they went through. But I wanted to be like them. I want to be like my dad and be honorable. But in a global or in a nationwide move, I think it's global as well, but the heroes were firemen and policemen and, army soldiers.
Yeah.
And you look at that honor, and that's what you were referring to is you take away the honor. You strip away honor of a man being a preacher, a man being a soldier, a man being a police officer. And you strip away something about somebody that makes them special, that they would give their life, or they would daily wake up knowing that their life could be taken away. And you look at a pastor and you see them on TV and how they're portrayed on TV. They're always portrayed by secular TV as flawed, these huge flaws. And I'm not saying that Christians are perfect. I'm not saying pastors are perfect. But what I'm saying is that there are preachers and pastors out there that I know and I look up to, and they walk the walk, and they live a life that's honorable to God. And you go watch the way a pastor's portrayed on TV, and if they're not at church, he's getting hammered drunk, and like that's not a good. That's what the world is adding to the mix of, like, this is what, and people believe it.
Yeah,
because they don't go to church and see for themselves that not all pastors are that indulgent type of person. They don't just do
Yeah, there's been a big shift in art in the last 50 years, and this has to do with postmodernism, where it's no longer. I mean, the function of characters in art classically has always been to set some kind of ideal to aspire to.
Right.
The characters aren't realistic. They're like superhuman versions, so we can get excited and inspired to be better, kind of thing. But the postmodern idea is that characters should be, I'm doing air quotes for the listeners, realistic.
Right.
You're supposed to portray characters with with their flaws and their humanness and their pettiness that undercuts their hypocrisy and all this kind of stuff. It's like, well, yeah, people are like that in real life.
Sure.
But the purpose of having a character in a novel or in a movie is so that we see this and it draws us out of our own little fallen place and reminds us what we're trying to aspire to. But that whole idea has been just killed dead by the culture.
And so that's the thing is, like,
men have nothing to aspire to.
Well, exactly. You don't want to grow to anything.
Right.
And so I have an issue with if the pastor is portrayed as an adulterer, as a drunkard, he shouldn't be a pastor.
Right.
That's probably not the best place for him, because the flaws in his life have separated him, taken away his ability to do so.
Yeah.
According to Scripture. But then if you think about a soldier or a police officer, there's hold on, sorry, got ahead of myself. If you think about a preacher, there are flaws that are there. And it's one thing to portray somebody having, if they weren't biased, I guess I would be okay with it, the way that TV and movies portray it. But I mean, there are flaws. I mean, I have plenty of flaws.
Oh yeah.
And I have things, but it's being willing to admit things and try to move past them. And that's the thing, is that the way TV portrays Christians, or the way TV portrays whoever else, anybody, is they're not willing most of the time to apologize and move past that.
Well, and then you watch that as the audience,
right?
And now it's got this poisonous effect of making you think that, you if you connect with this character and you see that, oh, this character, they have flaws and they're kind of, that's just part of it.
Yeah,
it's got this poisonous effect of making you be like, well, I'm just a policeman and I have all these flaws, and it's okay. It's just
and it
part
normalizes
of, it's just part of my inner drama, and
right.
I just got to accept these things and just
right.
live in my little wormy condition, when a character is supposed to draw you out of that, and give you something better to aspire to, because we're not meant to stay in that our nasty little state. We're trying to get out of it. We're trying to rise up. We're trying to transcend. We're trying to grow.
Right.
And that has been totally killed out in the culture.
Yeah. Well, and so like the heroes, if you do take the police officer, the soldier, fireman, it's just hard to see the move towards producing culturally a mindset that honors heroes or people more, just normal people. It's like everybody. And the new creations that are coming out of Hollywood are, okay, now we got to be inclusive. Yeah. It's got to be pastor with, it's got to be a transvestite, half Asian, half African American pastor to get the crowd to be okay with portraying anyone. Or we got to have a police officer, but he's he's a drug runner on the weekends. Like these huge issues
the
with
inclusiveness.
The moral, like, oh, we're okay with drugs. So, we're going to make somebody who shouldn't affiliate with that at all. Actually, their life's work is to stop that. Yeah. They're affiliated with it. And I've seen it. I mean, it's out there. And the bad guy's the good guy. Somebody who 50 years ago, at the end, John Wayne would, push off a train.
Yeah.
He's the good guy now.
Right.
And that's probably one of the biggest issues, is that the bad guy has become the good guy.
Right.
And it's different to have the person that's coming out of something, like they're chained down to something, and you see this redemption in their life, and like they become better and they become more like an honorable person. But we don't see that right now.
Nope. Yeah, I mean, redemption is one thing for a bad character, but the inclusiveness is it's a dumb idea. I'm going to go ahead and say it. I mean, the idea of inclusiveness is just an extension of that thing of, we have to portray real life. It's not the function of art to portray real life. You know, it's like, Michelangelo. You think about Michelangelo or Da Vinci. Yeah, the Ninja Turtle. That's right. Turtle. No, the Italian master, the Renaissance master. If you look at the works of the Italian, Renaissance painters, it's easy to critique it from this postmodern angle of like, well, this isn't like real life. This isn't realistic. Right. There's no, where's the person with this flaw, or where's the person with that flaw? Right. Inclusiveness is about, we got to have every single type of real life situation portrayed in art.
Right.
When that's not the function of art. Michelangelo knew that there were ugly people in the world.
Sure.
But he didn't paint them. Right. He's painting hyper idealized, beautiful versions of what humanity could be, what people could be if they, could rise out of their fallen state.
Yeah. Well, and it goes back to people not having the spiritual guidance in their life, that spiritual draw to be like Christ and be because that's the thing. I mean, they're heroes in my life and people I want to be like, but ultimately Christ is who I should want to be like.
And this comes down to a central theme about masculinity that I hope we can talk about a lot, which is this thing about standards. People have lost art has lost this quality of, giving an idealized vision to reach for. It's a manifestation of this thing of men have failed to set standards in their homes. It all starts in the home, right?
Exactly.
So children grow up without this standard that is like, you don't even hardly know it's there. It's like the air you breathe, that the father's supposed to maintain in the home. The wife doesn't have that standard to give direction, and the children don't see that. The home is weak. There's chaos in the home. There's chaos in the community. People don't have that sense of the father setting the tone, setting the agenda, having that feeling of loving authority that holds everything in place. And that's exactly what you see in the world. You don't have that sense of loving authority kind of keeping everything ordered. It's just this kind of free-for-all, chaotic power grab, money grab.
Right.
And it's not going to go anywhere constructive or good.
No, it's not. Well, and so that kind of, if we can segue, I've been waiting to use that.
Let's do it.
All the good podcasters say segue. So that segues us in to cancel culture ain't Jemima. It got ain't Jemima. And so,
Uncle Ben.
And Uncle Ben. All of these things that have
and
been.
Mrs. Butterworth.
You can't forget Mrs. Butterworth. Right. Is that in the home, the issue you do see with a lot of men in the home is that they back down. They fall victim, and we talked about it. Well, we were eating a little supper, and we were talking about it. Drew Brees, his situation, he had two grandfathers that fought in World War II, and that's something that's worth being proud of 10 times more than winning a Super Bowl or anything else, because they fought for our country. And he gets burnt by all these NFL players, people out there, and he backs down on what he says. It's not that, I believe in my heart that he believes what he said. But because of culture, because of this shift, because of this attack on him, he backed down on that.
Yep.
He pandered to what society is asking him to do.
Yep.
And you don't hear anything about it. People are like, "Oh yeah, he's all right, man. He's a good guy." And this is the issue with this movement, this whole cancel culture movement, is he could have possibly, and I personally think they probably went to him and they're like, "Listen, there's so much going on. If you don't say something, if you don't, step out and rescind your statements, we're going to have to, you're going to be taking an early retirement or something." I feel like that he was pushed to say what he said, and he did it.
Yeah. And
he's made enough money to retire. And I believe that he was pushed to do that, and I believe that he did that, and he backed down on what he believes. That's real. I think he believes it, to calm the mob down.
Yeah.
And so in the home, you see men when it hits the fan. When chaos, now this is such a smaller scale than Drew Brees. This is a small scale, and the wife gets mad about something. She doesn't like how he's leading the home. And, I don't believe in mistreating your wife, but I believe as a man, if you believe biblically, you're the head of the home. And unless you're making a decision that's about to, you answer to God for the decisions you make as the man of the home. Mm. Unless you're about to make a choice that will greatly hurt your family physically or something. It's the wife's responsibility to support the husband. It's the husband's responsibility to rightfully and biblically guide the wife and the family.
Right.
And that's where the disconnect is.
Right.
And so these men, things get a little rough. They start backing down on things. They see something stand in front of them, and they start backing down.
They cave, and then it's all over.
The kid, I don't want the kids to get picked on at school, so I'll let them take a part of this, or I'll let them do that. Yeah. And they pander to other people instead of feeling the responsibility of being a husband, of being a father, of being a Christian, of being a man, and know they'll stand before God, and every knee will bow, every tongue will confess, knowing that they pander to what the mob's calling for, and that's what's happened with the Aunt Jemima situation. Why don't you expound on the Aunt Jemima situation?
Well, just to add to that, I mean, Drew Brees is a great example because it was such a disappointment because he doesn't realize, and nobody seems to realize, that by him backing down on that, he's failing all of these young men who are his fans.
Exactly.
You know, he's failing all young boys, young men who don't know anything about politics, who don't know anything about the world.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and it goes deeper than politics.
But they see they see this guy, he takes a stand for what he believes in.
Right.
And then immediately, just a little bit of pressure on his stuff,
right?
You know, his things and his position, he backs down. By doing that, he failed. You know, how many young men? And it's just, and the same thing happens with fathers in the home.
Yeah.
You know, something happens at school, and the father feels like, well, this isn't really right, but you know, I don't want my kid to, you know, have to get picked on or have to struggle through something, so they just let it happen. You know, those little compromises are such massive failures.
Yeah.
And you don't even realize it.
Right.
You know, or the culture doesn't realize it. You know, the men are not realizing it, but it's the devastation is huge, and it causes so much destruction because the one thing that we have to have is men who will stand up for what's right and for the truth, no matter what.
Sure.
And you don't see it anywhere. Yeah. And people wonder why the world is such a mess.
Yeah. Well, because the people that do, they get called, you know, if you do stand up, you're like the Drew Brees situation.
Right.
You know, like, oh, you're going to be racist like this. Is this how it's going to be? Like, you're going to be, you know, you're called a racist for believing and standing in your country.
Well, that's been true of conservatives for a long time now.
Yeah.
For sure in recent history, but I don't even know, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, conservatives got backed into that corner where like they're just going to keep their mouths shut.
Right. And that's where the church is cornered right now.
Okay, I'm glad you said that because I was just going to tell a story about, I was going to this church. I won't name any names.
Save that for the after show.
Right. And I just started to notice that the people that I knew to be conservative in the church, they never spoke up about anything.
Right.
You know, the progressive people had no problem being very vocal all the time because it's the same voice that's in the media. It's the same voice that's in the entertainment. It's the same voice that, you know, but the people that I knew were conservative people would never speak up because they didn't want to be called racist, or they didn't want to be called sexist, or they didn't want to be called xenophobic or homophobic, anything. Whatever. Right. And they've got backed into that corner, and it made me so disappointed because when I joined this church, I knew that there was a mix. There was a political mix at this church. And I thought, well, that's cool. Maybe some like good, constructive dialogue will happen here. I'd love to see that and be a part of it. But it never happened. Yeah. Because the conservatives are too afraid to speak up. And I think that's a big thing that I want to advocate for in this podcast is conservative America has got to start speaking out vocally and fighting back in the culture war. And I just read this really great article in the Federalist. It was talking about Madison, who went through this own thing in his career where, you know, Madison was so believed in the Constitution. And he had this kind of idea that, you know, you could just rely on the Constitution. You didn't have to fight the culture wars. You didn't have to play political games. Right. You could just keep quiet kind of, and the Constitution would work for you, you know? And conservatives have been kind of doing that for the last few decades and just kind of staying out of the culture war.
The right is the laziest. You know? I mean, they are so lazy. That's what's caused a lot of this to be able to come up so quickly.
It's got to stop.
Is the laziness. You know? Because, you know, George Bush, didn't have to do anything to get anybody to vote for him. He just knew that there was a core group of people that would vote Republican regardless. So he didn't care. Like, and that's part of conservative values. I understand that, and I appreciate that. Part of conservative values are I don't have to have every bit of whatever's going on in the world. I don't have to be a part of everything. You know, I don't have to be on Facebook. I don't have to be on YouTube. I don't have to. I get that. That's part of conservative values because the conservative mindset's not driven by society's needs or wants. But the thing is, if you don't start getting in there and I was just talking to a fellow pastor earlier today, and he was a little bit apprehensive about starting when coronavirus started. He was a little bit apprehensive about starting a Facebook Live, podcast or not but like a video series for their church. And he was a little apprehensive, but he said, you know what? I've really seen some benefits from it. And you have to bridge that. I think probably my mission statement of this is very short, but of our podcast, but bridging the gap between where do we find, and I like what you wrote on one of our topic thoughts of the need for conservatives to shift away from intellectualism towards spiritual foundation. And it's bridging the gap between the conservative mindset and biblical truth. Because that's what's so wrong is I believe that this conservative movement is separated, that it's separated from biblical truths and biblical mindsets. And, it's just like the church situation, and I'm not trying to be rude or disagree with you or anything, but, to me, if I see a very evident, very clear difference in the congregation, progressive, conservative, that's very concerning for me, especially, and I believe that comes back to leadership of the pastor, because as the under shepherd, watching out for that flock, watching out for that church, it's vital that your guidance and your leadership instills those conservative values, because conservative is not just exclusively Republican. I mean, it's conservative means.
Well, I was going to say that too. I've been thinking about this today, where it's like thinking about what we're going to talk about in this podcast. To me, it's not even about a conservative thing. It's about right and wrong and good and evil. And it's not that conservatives have to speak up about politics. It's that good people have to speak up against evil.
Exactly.
And people who want to throw away the law are on the side of evil. Like they have to be called out. Yeah. People who want to reject the family and decency and honor and morality and all of these things have to be called out, and we have to say no. Right. Loudly and vocally, and with and with a show of force.
Well, and I feel like Christians have not felt like a lot of Christians are scared to say anything. Yeah, and it's a problem. Yeah, and that's what I want to change with this right here and what we're trying to do. So, to go back to what we were talking about the destruction in the home. Yeah, and you think about the man, the leader of the home, and how there's been this kind of cave in, this fall. You fall to whatever everybody needs because you don't want the pressure, so you just fall into it. And so that takes me back to Aunt Jemima. This is so frustrating to me. So for anyone who doesn't follow the news, we on this podcast, we will talk about politics. We will talk about things in the news. We're not a news podcast, though. We want to talk about things going on politically and how good biblical values, biblical mindsets, and how, especially for our men that listen, how to stand strong as a man through, not that we don't love the ladies, but, as a man, how you stand strong through these situations. Right. And because that's the thing. I don't need a Republican politician to come out and tell me how I need to believe. I shouldn't have to have Fox News or CNN, or definitely not CNN, but, I don't have to have these media sources tell me how to think. Right. I can think on my own. But I want to make sure that when I'm thinking on my own, I'm using the Bible as a foundation. And so that's kind of part of our goal in this podcast. And so as we're seeing this, we're talking about it. We talked at one thing, James and I, we actually work together. And so we try to keep our conversations about the podcast and things like that to a minimum. But there was just one thing, one situation today we had to talk about. And so I'm reading this directly off CNN's website. So we will also I will commit to read the news off of off of mostly left-leaning sources because I think it's hilarious.
Yeah.
Some of the things they say. So, all right. So it says the Aunt Jemima brand acknowledges its racist past and it will be retired. Quaker Oats is retiring the more than 130-year-old Aunt Jemima brand and logo, acknowledging its origins are based on a racial stereotype. As we work to make progress toward racial equality through several initiatives, we must take a hard look at our portfolio of brands and ensure that they reflect our values and meet our consumers' expectation, the Pepsi-owned company said in a statement provided to CNN Business. James, this is insane. There's no other way of explaining how insane this is. It's just beyond comprehension. I can't even fathom.
Yeah.
Where they. I mean.
Well, I mean, this is. Let me just try to say something about it. I mean.
What do you say?
Well, here's the problem. All these corporations and all these celebrities and all these people who are like just trying their hardest to like appease the Black Lives Matter protest phenomenon.
Right.
They're just bending over backwards to just, what can we say to, look good in this crisis? What can we do to look? That's what nobody really cares about trying to make things right. That's all a show. That's a lie.
Sure.
People are trying to figure out how to look good and come out clean in this crisis.
Yeah.
How do we not lose money? Or what they're going to boycott us? It's that same thing of people are afraid of losing stuff. Mm-hmm. So they're compromised on the truth.
Yeah. Well, and so that's I guess where bringing up this conversation right now in this episode is vital because it goes back to that issue in the home.
Yeah.
Of
somebody
doesn't like it,
thing.
so I'm I'll let my kid participate just so that
it's just
they don't have
begging.
a hard life.
It's like men just begging women, just tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Just what do you want? What can I do? It's just so pathetic, and that's what we're seeing from
ridiculous.
Every sector right now.
I mean, and I'm not an African American, so to see Aunt Jemima bottles, I don't know what that feels like for people,
right?
Or Miss Butterworth or Uncle Ben,
right? But
boxes.
here's the point: getting rid of Uncle Ben on a box of rice is like that is just not gonna change anything. It's not gonna solve. It's a nothing issue.
Exactly.
It's purely done for the sake of image. It has nothing to do with reality at all.
Yeah.
At all.
Well, so all right, so we strip away Miss Butterworth, we strip away Aunt Jemima, we strip away Uncle Ben. Let's. Let
me put it in a direct way. Getting rid of Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben, it will not reduce the rate of single motherhood in Black communities.
Right.
It will not reduce fatherlessness in the home in Black communities. So it's irrelevant because that's the only thing that will change anything.
Right.
And that's for Black communities, white communities, Hispanic communities, Asian, whatever. As long as fathers are not in the home in a strong position of loving authority, nothing will change.
Oh no,
nothing is going to change.
Right. Well, and so I guess that's my thing is, all right, we've done that. They've openly and very aggressively boycotted, destroyed, stripped away Confederate monuments. The attack is clearly coming for Jefferson, Washington, our founding fathers. So here's my thing. If we're going to do this, we're just going to do this. Is the way my dad always was. I hated this when I was a kid, but I greatly respect it now, is if we're going to do something like that, we're going to do it across the board. So North Carolina, we live in North Carolina. We're going to take away the name North Carolina. We can't be called North Carolina because slaves lived in North Carolina, because we killed Indians in North Carolina, because people moved to North Carolina and took somebody else's land. We're going to take Virginia because Virginia there were slaves. Indiana.
Right.
We're going to change that name. All right. Let's do away with everything. Let's just, if we're going to do it, do it across the board.
There's a key thing you're getting at here that people listening, I really want you to hear this. There is no end to this campaign. The logic of, getting rid of Aunt Jemima, getting rid of monuments, it has no end. There's no length you can go to that you'll get somewhere one day and they'll say, okay, that's good enough.
Yeah. And you know what the new name is? Chaz or Chop.
Oh, there you go.
I mean, that's the mindset. I mean, the thing is, there's never been any land that's ever been gained, ever been won, that somebody hasn't fought for. I mean, that's just the way it was.
Yeah.
I mean, our ancestors got here and we pushed the Indians as far west as they could go. We told them we wouldn't bother them, and we did it again. That's wrong. Andrew Jackson, for all of his great qualities, he was very flawed because, I mean, there were things about him that are not honorable or not great, but he still, in the time he was living in the day he was living in, he led the country. I mean, he fought for our country. He served our country as the president. I can't go say that Andrew Jackson was an awful man. I mean, yes, he had flaws. He had things that are not honorable. He had things in his life that were not great. In 2020 terms,
yeah.
I mean, it's hard to go and destroy Andrew Jackson. It's hard to destroy. I mean, probably my favorite figure outside of the Bible to study and read is Stonewall Jackson. And, you know, there's things about him that were flawed, but he was the greatest military mind that ever in U.S. history. I mean, and I will argue with anybody about that, because when you read the stories of things that he did, accomplishments that he made, I mean, they called his army the Foot Cavalry.
Yeah.
That's a great accomplishment. If you value honor, if you value good manly things, I mean, that's awesome. I mean, that means that your men respect you enough that they'll march anywhere for you. And to go tear down something like what he has or what he's accomplished or in honor of him, yes, slavery's wrong. Yes, things are wrong. But there are good things that came from him. I mean, tactics and strategic plans and things. I mean, he helped write the book on that stuff.
Right.
For us to win wars down the road. And why would we strip that away?
Yeah.
Why would we get rid of that? You take Aunt Jemima, that's where we know we've went insane. It's syrup.
It's syrup.
I mean, you put it on pancakes. And as much of as I'm an advocate against taking down Confederate military monuments, right. I'm completely against that. But I can understand. I could see that happening. I can't understand it, but I can see that happening before I can see somebody wanting syrup to change their name.
Right.
And it's this company that is so scared that they pander to the mob, they fall to the mob, and
right.
What are they going to call it?
Well, the Aunt Jemima thing, again, like for the companies, they don't really care. They're just trying to look good. But for the people calling for the end of Aunt Jemima, they don't really. Nobody's really. I mean, I'm not African American, but I'll bet you good money that deep down nobody really sees Aunt Jemima in the grocery store, and that's the source of their pain in their life.
They don't leave crying over that.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's because they had no fathers or weak fathers or whatever the cause of real pain in people's lives are, and then maybe Aunt Jemima makes them feel bad because they're already in that state. But Aunt Jemima is nothing.
But that's where we know we don't have a spiritual and a moral foundation, is that when something like that can shake you up to the point to where
that's
you
exactly
cry about
right. And that goes that goes so far beyond like any of these issues with Black Lives Matter. It's the whole generation of all the Antifa people, all of these people, and this is like beating a dead horse in like conservative podcasts.
Right.
It's about how like weak and spineless and like millennial people are, and it's definitely true. But like, it's not. I don't want to have this podcast where we just like ridicule those people, because it's sad. It's a shame.
Yeah, sure.
Shame on men for raising this generation. Shame on us for not salvaging the moral backbone that it would take to raise a new generation. That's what's more important now.
Right.
It's not so important now to fix the problems of the millennials. It's on us now who are starting our families to raise a real new generation.
Sure.
Because that's the only hope. There's not a lot of hope for turning around, this current generation.
Yeah.
I don't think.
Well, I mean,
You know.
it's. I see what you're saying. I mean, I think that the hope would be in revival in the church, to see the church get fired up about, trying to show that, you don't have to live like this. That's the thing. That's what I feel like we need to offer, and what I want to offer with our views from this podcast is, are you considered a millennial?
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm in our age range. I mean, you're on the early range of millennial. I'm on the later range millennial. That's just a weird. That's a weird group of people that grew up. I mean, we just grew up in.
We grew up with the most poisonous culture,
and we grew up
ever.
in the same generation, air quotes, but it was so different. I mean, even 10 years later, however, whatever our age difference is, but I grew up with parents that they didn't let me indulge in just whatever I wanted to get into, and something I thought of growing up, and this was my dad, but I don't know, I just specifically remember my mom doing this, and I've told this story when I was preaching before, and it was just funny to see my mom's reaction to this, but kids would always get something new. They'd always get something fun. It'd be like this, the new iPhone 3. And it's like, man, the new iPhone 3. It's like, man, that's so cool. And I wanted one so bad.
That was never a thing when I was a kid.
Right, exactly.
We had dial-up.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, we had dial-up.
I was in high school with the iPhone 3.
Okay.
So that ages me, but it wasn't that long ago. But it was like, man, I want that. Well, I ended up with a hand-me-down iPod Touch that didn't work for like a month. So my mom and dad didn't have.
Poor child.
Right, but I'm going somewhere. And I was like, man, this isn't an iPhone 3. But it's not that my mom and dad didn't have the money to go buy an iPhone 3. I mean, they probably didn't just have an extra $300 laying around, but they could have made it happen.
Yeah.
They could have squeezed it together and made it happen. But they didn't, on the principle of, just because everybody else has an iPhone 3, I didn't need an iPhone 3. Everybody got a new pair of shoes. School started. I didn't always get the most expensive pair of Nikes, and now I'm thankful I didn't.
Yeah.
But I always had clothes. I always had shoes. I always had a backpack. It was just the mindset that, man, all these kids have this or all these kids have that. My mom and dad, they weren't willing to submit to what society said that I had to have to be a cool kid, because I looked at a lot of kids that had that, and they live miserable lives today. It's not what we're given by our parents that make us in a physical fashion that make us better,
right?
But it's what's passed down in a spiritual way.
No,
what's passed down. What my parents passed to me was spiritual truth.
Yeah.
Love for the Lord. My dad was, and there were times, man, I was like, my dad's brutal. I mean, he was tough on me. There were a few times in my life, and I look at it and I'm like, man, I needed it. Yeah. I needed that tough love. Make me, I got a baby on the way, and I'm thinking about the magnitude that God would bless me with a life, with literally a little human being.
Yeah.
That's huge. And this is what causes this generational crisis, is parents, they'll go into debt so their kids have all the new stuff, and they give their kids all the new things. The kids don't value work.
Right.
So the kids don't bother to go get a job. Mom and dad have created the beast, the money beast, and that beast doesn't care about working. So that beast that doesn't care about working, they have their own kids. But it's not in the normal way. It's not in the normal fashion. It's not that honest white picket fence and, down home values.
Right.
It's in the wrong way. And then grandparent who paid for that child to get everything they wanted and do everything they wanted, they have to raise the grandchild. And then the grandchild's raised soft because it's harder when you're 70 years old to have the diligence to instill the same values you could when you were 30. And here we are. And it's this disconnect in the home.
Yeah.
And we have to stand strong on truth. We have to know what truth is. Truth comes from God's word. Line everything up with God's word. If it comes out and it's pure, it's true, it's good. If you feel wrong about it, leave it alone. And I think that if people would just get a hold of that, we could change everything. God wants to change everything. I don't think he wants us to live like this.
No, I don't think so.
But I think that the world we live in, because of this shift away from the Lord, that's why we're living in it. My grandfather on Sunday, he always says things, and I'm like, man, if I had just an ounce of that wisdom. He was talking about the parallel between Israel and the church today, and how you see Israel, they're up and they're down, they're up and they're down.
Yeah.
And while we're not exactly Israel, I believe that America is very similar, especially the church. We're spiritually Israel. And you see this up and this down, this up and the down, things church people are living through that we would have never imagined. We're in a down point right now. And I believe we've got the right president in the White House right now. But he can't save the nation. It's God and his provision and his protection that can save our country. And I want to support the president. I'm not I don't like the government, but I like the president.
Yeah.
But it is going to take God's intervention.
Well, I think you're right about, Trump can't save America, but I think he's opened a door for people.
Oh yeah.
Because he's given, for the first time, a kick for people who do love the country and who want to stand for what's right, to just say it's okay to speak up.
Yeah. And it's been he's a great example of that. And so that's the thing. I mean, like I said, I think we got the right person in that position.
Yeah. And I do think that's an example that we have to start following, is like, you can't not tell the truth because you're afraid of being called a name.
Yeah.
Or you're afraid you're going to lose something.
Right.
Or people are going to look at you a certain way.
Yeah.
Or your brand is going to lose customers. Or, people have to come from their own center.
Right.
Yeah. And stop trying to appease people, because it's in the same thing in the home.
Yeah.
You got to stop trying to appease your children. You got to stop trying to appease your wife. That's not your job as a man.
Yeah.
You stand for God's authority in the world.
Right.
You can't function by just trying to appease your wife and appease your children. Right. You're supposed to carry the light forward and be that guide and be that leader.
It's got, and I want us to talk about our goals for a few minutes.
Okay, let's do that, because we're already over an hour. Yeah.
But in our endeavor to be more like God, be more like Jesus, it's important that we do focus on carrying that light. And I would rather be the one for my family to have to face the fire. And I think that's another thing that men especially should take on, that load of, if I can, and this could be part of the issue we see today, but I would rather take on the load of whatever the burden is or whatever it is to prevent my wife from having to, or prevent my child from having to.
Yeah.
And in a way, that's created what we see now today, because as we've seen success, we've seen prosperity, it's created people who are weaker.
Right.
But there's things that I've went through in my life and experienced that I don't want my son to. I don't want my wife to. There's things she's went through that I know that she doesn't want that for our son. But it's relinquishing that to God and letting, Lord, lead me. It's living a prayerful life and saying, what I walk through, lead me and make me the dad or the husband I need to be, so that I can be an example to my wife, so that I can lead my wife in the right way. Not lead, because there's a lot of husbands that lead their wives, but they lead their wives down a wrong path.
Yeah.
Children too.
Yeah.
And so we have to take that foundation spiritually and say, God, just take this, build me up on this foundation, and let me lead like I need to. And then I think if we relinquish the power to him, it'll all be fine.
It's good preaching, Josh. It's a good sermon. All right. Well, we did mostly what we set out to do in this episode. Is there anything else you want to touch on before we wrap it up?
Yeah. I do want to talk about just really quickly, kind of who we are, kind of our values, and what we're looking forward to talking about in here. We are going to cover things from Aunt Jemima to church to guns, the military, history, supporting our police, supporting first responders, fire departments, whatever it may be, why we do what we do. We're pro-gun, we're pro-life, we are pro-constitution, we're pro-military, police, and our families, and we just want to share that with you. And I think that's going to be exciting to talk about some of these things, whoever may listen to us, that maybe they don't know what you and I have come to realize in our lives about honor, and you made some notes on here, virtue, honor, humility, that maybe they don't know. Maybe they need a voice that they can listen to. Maybe they do know. And sometimes you do know what matters in life. And maybe there's people that you read this list that agree with everything we say, but they just need some encouragement. And, that's the tone, I believe, of this podcast, is just to be encouraging, because, man, I'll turn on Fox News for 30 minutes and I'm like down for the count for a while. I mean, it's depressing.
Right. Yeah.
So we want to be encouraging with what we're doing, and kind of just share ourselves with you, and be excited to hear from you. And I'm looking forward to the project.
Me too. Well, we'll be doing this at least once a week for this foreseeable future, until the end of civilization, which might only be a few months. So
yeah. Well, just. We will not be played in your local Chaz or Chop area.
No, for sure. Well, maybe. I hope some people at Chop hear this, because there might be, I was just thinking about this. You said something earlier about people hitting rock bottom or whatever and realizing they don't have to live this way. I'm like, I know there's people involved in Chop right now who are suffering to the point where they're like, because I've been there.
Yeah.
I've been to the point where I've been caught up in all that same kind of madness and gone to a point of being so low and had to go through, realizing that I had to come out of it.
Certainly.
So there's people in there right now who need to hear some encouragement.
I'm excited for us to get to talk about that, because you went through that experience on kind of one political spectrum.
I've been everywhere in the political. I've been all over.
Yeah. I mean, well, so you've been all over. I've been on that experience on the very right side of the spectrum.
Right.
And so it'll be exciting to talk about those things, and learning just to be more. I think one thing is being civil. We don't see that right now.
No, I think respect is very important. Yeah.
And but you can be the boldest people I know are the most respectful people.
Yeah.
And that's what's so important.
Right.
So we could continue forever, but we will we're ready to call.
Yeah. We're going to wrap it up, and we'll see you again in a few days.
Awesome.
All right.
And if you don't know what Chop is or Chaz is, we will be getting into that later.
We will get into all of those things. Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you for listening to the Liberty Bell. We believe that only the spiritual strength of men can restore America. We are pro-cop, pro-family, pro-Second Amendment, and dedicated to the proposition that America is only as strong as the moral character of her people. You can get involved by emailing libertybellpodcast@gmail.com with your questions and comments.